حي على الفلاح.
Is that in 711, Tariq ibn Ziyad, rahimahullah, a Berber from North Africa, following the commands of his leader, whose name was Musa bin Nusayr, rahimahullah, who was the leader of the Muslims in North Africa at the time, went across the straits, which is now known as Gibraltar. He had stopped at a mountain, so they called the mountain Jebel Tariq. So Jebel Tariq is Gibraltar. That's where it comes from. He stopped at the mountain, and they were actually responding to a cry that was being given by monotheistic people who were living in the Iberian Peninsula. And when you study the history of the Iberian Peninsula and the Gothic people, and you study the Catholic Church and what was going on, right around that time, around 711, there was a king named Roderick, and he was ruling the area in a feudalistic way. And they called out to Musa bin Nusayr. They're ready for somebody to take them out of this rule into a rule where they would live under justice. And so Musa bin Nusayr, rahimahullah, sent Tariq ibn Ziyad, and they went in 711 across, and they met Roderick in a decisive battle. And after this decisive battle, which was won by the Muslims, they continued to go north. As they went north, they found that the people were actually glad to see them. And they found that there was almost no resistance. And so by 3 years, within 3 years, and Musa bin Nusayr actually later on caught up to Tariq and joined the forces. And within 3 years, they had taken control of all of Spain except the northwest corner of Spain, the mountainous regions in the top. That's the only part of Spain that was left for them. And they controlled the whole area. And it is interesting because there is a document which was describing a treaty. This was done between Abdullah ibn Musa ibn Nusayr, and it was in 713. And it was between the Visigoth prince of Murcia, Theodemir, and this was about the surrender of a particular city. In the treaty, it clearly states that the Christians and the Jews who were living in the city would maintain their synagogues and churches, that they would be allowed to have autonomy in the city, that the princes and the rulers in Murcia would be able to maintain most of their belongings. They did not have to surrender their belongings to the Muslims, that just about all of the slaves in the city were immediately freed. When this treaty came about, the people were joyous. The taxes that were on them in Roderick's time were lifted from them. And so this type of justice, when established in a practical way, the news of this spread throughout Spain. And this is really, I believe, the reason why the Muslims were successful in taking so much of the territory in such a short time. Because if they were a terrible force, surely the people would have resisted. And when you look at the numbers of the Muslims, you will find that the number was very small. Some reports say that when Tariq met Roderick, Tariq's forces were only somewhere between 16 to 20,000 men. Roderick's forces were over 100,000. That's the type of odds that they were facing. And so they were able to establish themselves in the Iberian Peninsula. What developed out of that was what I would call a multicultural society, where people were allowed to be non-Muslims and have their own houses of worship. They were allowed to carry on with their arts and sciences. They were also allowed, to a certain extent, to even judge themselves. In small matters, Jewish law or Christian law would apply to the people within their enclaves, within their areas. The general law of the land was the law of Islam. Also, it was a common thing to find a person in what the Muslims call Al-Andalus. It was a common thing to find a person who could speak Arabic and a dialect of Spanish and could read Latin. So with this ability, they were prime sources of translation. And so that kind of a society developed to such an extent that even in Jewish literature, Maimonides, Ibn Ma'mun, was one of the famous philosophers and scientists of Jewish literature. He existed during this time, and it was considered to be, during the Muslim rule, one of the golden ages for the Jewish in terms of arts and sciences. They called the country Al-Andalus. This is an Arabic word, and it means something to the effect of to become green at the end of summer. And it was such a beautiful place. And the way they describe the cities in Al-Andalus of Toledo and Seville and Granada and Cordoba, Valencia, and the areas, the descriptions that come in the literature is beautiful descriptions of people being able to live what I would call in a holistic fashion. They were able to develop science in such a way that the science did not destroy the environment. This is a very important accomplishment they made. It wasn't the size of their buildings, but they were able to, for instance, take water and bring the water down from a mountain using aqueducts, using canals, and canal it all through the cities so that every house had access to running water. And they did that without destroying anything or damming anything up or blocking anything. They did it in such a way they were using gravity. This is a holistic way of approaching things. And if you go to Granada today, you will still see the waterworks are being used from the time of the Muslims. The water is flowing all over the place. Among the products that were introduced into the West through Al-Andalus, I'll name a few of these products to you. Cotton, paper, glass mirrors, street lamps, salt, colored glass, silk, satin, pepper, cinnamon, handkerchiefs, deodorant, kerosene, linen, firearms, cotton balls, paper money, postage stamps, book binding, clocks, ceramic tiles, nitric acid, soap, astrolabes, compasses for navigation, slide rules, rulers, surgical instruments, windmills, spinning wheels, rose water, maps, globes, citrus and nectar fruits, carpets, eyeglasses, curtains, test tubes, porcelain, fine furs, velvet, almanacs, and encyclopedias. So you can see right away that some of the contributions that they have made, that's a legacy in itself. And they made it in such a way that it was usable for Western society, and it helped Europe to come out of the Dark Ages. Because again, if you read in most of the history books, after the fall of the Roman Empire, then they say it's the Dark Ages, right? And the lights go out. And it's usually a little chapter. Then the Renaissance. The Renaissance is back in, the lights are on, and everything is good. What happened between the year 700, okay, to 1500? What happened in that time? It was the Dark Ages? It was the golden age of Islam. After Tariq ibn Ziyad, rahimahullah, in the year 756 AD, a man by the name of Abdurrahman al-Saqar, Abdurrahman the Falcon, who came from Damascus. He was part of the Umayyad dynasty. He fled because of an internal war that was going on. He fled to Andalusia. And he established, the people accepted him as their ruler, and he established a very important dynasty of Umayyads who were living there. And he was able to immediately establish his capital. He took Cordoba, we would say Qurtuba. He took it as his capital, and he ruled from 756 to 788. From amongst his achievements, he built the great mosque of Cordoba. He also used an aqueduct, and he brought water into Qurtuba, and he made bathhouses, bridges, castles. He built universities, and he made Cordoba in the 9th and 10th century. It would be what we would call like one of the wonders of the world. Cordoba at that time would have been one of the wonders of the world. At that time, there were over 200,000 houses. This is the 9th and the 10th century, the Dark Ages, right? So there's no other major city functioning in Western Europe. 200,000 houses. 600 mosques, 900 public baths, 50 hospitals. You could go in any direction and the streets were lit for 10 miles. Lighted streets. This is when the capitals we know as London and Paris and the great cities in Europe were in darkness. And in many cases you have to go through mud. Paved streets were in Spain. And so the great leaders and intellectuals of Europe went down into Andalusia, to Toledo and to Seville, to the universities to study, and then took it back to the different areas of Europe, and they were able to develop the great universities that we know today. And so we find that Abdurrahman as-Sakha was able to establish a mighty dynasty. What is important for us is two things. The first point is that many Muslims might ask, and other people might ask, why, if they were so powerful, why did they go down? Why, after such heights of civilization, you find them losing strength? When we look at the society itself, and Ibn Khaldun in his Muqaddamah talks about the cyclical nature of history, that is a cycle. And when you have strong, dynamic generations, then you will find your civilization is powerful. But when corruption sets in, then weakness sets in. And so, they became weak because they started to look at each other as nations and tribes. Arab and non-Arab, African and Berber, European and Turkish, Persian. Then the rich separated from the poor. And then the drinking of wine. And then all types of corruption set in. And so they were conquered. They were literally conquered. And the forces of Ferdinand and Isabella made their way down from the north, the northwest corner, the mountainous areas. They had not gone into this area, and they moved from the mountainous areas down slowly, taking back section by section. They took back Spain. And so this is part of the legacy of Muslim Spain. I mean, Muslims were in Spain for 700 years, man. I would also change that title of the Dark Ages. And really it is the Bright Ages. It is the age of light, because light was all over the world at the time. And so darkness maybe was for some people, but it was not for all people. And I think that the only way we can really go forward as one human race is that we have to appreciate the histories and the struggling and the suffering of all people.